One Question is brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996. Our guest today on One Question is the News and Observer's Luke DeCock, who's been in the Triangle, Raleigh, Durham area for 16 plus years writing for the paper. And of course, we want to talk a little bit today about the ACC's decision to move neutral site championships for the 16-17 competition seasons out of the state of North Carolina because of the HB2 bill. The NCAA obviously made this decision a couple of days ago, and the ACC has followed in behind. We understand kind of the macro level development. Given your experience in the marketplace, I'm curious of your viewpoint on how this decision impacts the fan bases at the individual North Carolina-based ACC institutions. So North Carolina, NC State, Duke, and Wake. How do the fan bases of those four schools view this decision and this move?
Well, it's still viewed, regardless of that, through very partisan lenses. It's just the nature of the beast these days in North Carolina and in the country. But I think it has some very specific and disparate impacts on those schools and their fans in ways that really do impact fans directly. I mean, number one is the opportunity to see these teams play in postseason competition, whether that's ACC or NCAA competition. The reason why North Carolina has hosted more NCAA basketball tournament games than any other state is because people go here. The NCAA puts regionals here or sub-regionals here because they know the tickets will sell. And fans of North Carolina and Duke in particular this year, I think, were operating under the assumption that one or both of those teams would have been in Greensboro in March and would buy tickets for that accordingly, which is traditionally how it works, which is why Greensboro and Raleigh and Charlotte and to a lesser extent Winston-Salem have hosted so many regionals in recent years. So you take that opportunity away for one, and the Women's College Cup was going to be in Cary. That's right in the backyard of North Carolina, traditionally the most powerful women's soccer program, although obviously there's a lot more competitive equality in that sport these days. And then the ACC championships. North Carolina played in the ACC championship game last year in Charlotte. That was a huge deal for North Carolina fans. So it does take away the opportunity for fans to stay home and see their teams compete in those postseason opportunities, especially in a year when the ACC basketball tournament, which is the most important college athletic event in the state, is being played in Brooklyn, and a lot of people won't be able to go for logistical or financial reasons. Who would go if it were in Greensboro or Charlotte, which is traditionally, where it has been most of the time. So those are issues as well. And the other part of it is for their teams, just from a competitive standpoint, using basketball as an example again, North Carolina is 33-1 in NCAA tournament games played within the state. So now they're going to have to go out of state, and that probably would not be a tremendous hardship for the Tar Heels if they're good enough to get a seed that keeps them close to home. But it's still a little bit of a margin of error historically speaking, and Duke actually has fared just as well out of state as in state, so maybe not as big a deal for them. But if you think of these other sports, Mount Olive College, a Division II powerhouse that is part of the hosting crew for the Division II tournament that's been in Cary since 2009. That's an opportunity they could lose to play close to home. There's a lot of little impacts like that where these schools might have circled this season on their calendar 2 or 3 years ago at the end of the last bid cycle and said, hey, look, if we can be a national championship caliber team in 2016 or 2017, we will have the opportunity to play at home. Women's lacrosse, for example, is going to be in Cary this year for the first time ever. And the women's lacrosse teams around here might have circled that date on their calendar or their fans, and now that's gone. And those actually are probably relatively minor impacts compared to the money and the jobs, the hotel room nights, the exposure, and all of that North Carolina is losing as these athletic events leave the state.
As we sit here on Wednesday afternoon, the majority of the narrative right now is about the decision that was just made today. But I want to ask you to look forward a little bit and not analyze the political landscape as much as simply give us a look at the timeline of how HB2 will be debated and potentially in the future changed, decided upon, legislated, et cetera, in the coming months and potentially years in the state of North Carolina.
Yeah, and with the disclaimer that I'm not a political analyst, but I can lay out some of the basics. And the landscape is this: North Carolina has a legislature that has a Republican majority in both chambers. It has a Republican governor, and that was the group that pushed through the original version of HB2 in response to Charlotte's anti-transgender discrimination law. That there were some provisions from HB2 that have been modified, including the part about originally that you weren't allowed to sue within state. It would have to go to federal court over these issues. And that's changed. But the bulk of the law and the most controversial portions of the law remain intact. The majority and the governor have shown really no willingness to re-examine HB2. In fact, it seems like with each one of these withdrawals and companies that back out of expansion plans or athletic events that leave, there's actually almost more intransigence on the part of the backers of HB2. So that's sort of the political landscape. Even if that changes to a certain degree in November, where there's a hotly contested race for governor between the incumbent and the Democratic challenger, who's the Attorney General, that may not change the election may not change the composition of the legislature. So you may end up with a Democratic governor and a Republican legislature in one or both chambers, and that may be at that point may become even more difficult to affect change. But there's no question that there's damage being done economically in terms of the perception of the state. And there's still more hanging out there. The NCAA pulled one academic year of events from North Carolina, but there's still the 2017-28 event that includes the basketball tournament in Charlotte. The first and second rounds are scheduled for Charlotte. And then beyond that, we're right in the middle of the 2019 to 2022 bid cycle. So now you're talking about 4 years of events. And in that sense, it's possible that the NCAA has done North Carolina a favor by pulling the events this year as opposed to just skipping North Carolina in the bid cycle. It's possible North Carolina could lose a year of events, make some changes or repeal HB2 to get back into the frame with the NCAA, and then get back into that bid cycle where traditionally North Carolina has been a major host for the NCAA, and you would expect there to be dozens of events that North Carolina would win in that bid cycle if HB2 is not an issue. Is that enough pressure politically to force a repeal? It certainly doesn't seem like any of the athletic activity so far has provoked any change.
So last question, and again, with the disclaimer that you are not a political analyst, but you've got a great grasp on this thing. And we know sports is such a key piece of society, and certainly the ACC is interwoven into the state of North Carolina. If these don't push change further, what will?
That's a really good question. And the answer may be an election. That maybe the sports dynamic would have an effect on the election in November to a degree that none of us can anticipate right now. That would certainly be unusual and groundbreaking, but I suppose it's within the realm of possibility, because that's the thing is what we've gotten to this week more than anything, more than the NBA All-Star Game, as important an event as that was for Charlotte. Look, North Carolina is about, well, I wrote this the other day. There's two things in North Carolina that were sort of above partisan political debate, and that was basketball and barbecue. And now we're down to barbecue. Basketball is so important to the fabric of this state, to its history, to its tradition, to its self-image. And when you start messing with basketball, you're messing with something that it really isn't nearly as important as any of the other issues that HB2 raises. Now, we're talking about discrimination and things like that. I mean, these are big, big issues: civil rights, human rights. Basketball pales in comparison to all of that stuff. But basketball is so important here that when you start messing with it, you really don't know what's going to happen next. Politically, emotionally, culturally, it's a big deal. It's a really big deal here. And we've reached a point with HB2 where it's really starting to pluck at the very strings of what makes North Carolina North Carolina. It's a very strange time, and it's really hard to say what could happen next, other than as long as HB2 remains in place, North Carolina will continue to take this in the sports solar plexus.
And that's today's One Question, brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996. One Question is designed to give D1 Ticker subscribers valuable insights on how executive leaders in college athletics think about key issues on their respective campuses, in their departments, or within their leagues and conferences. One Question is brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996.